And I've got the motion up before us now, and I will read it again, and that is that this Planning Committee acknowledges and thanks Elaine for her dedication and service to the mayors, councillors, IMSB members and committees, noting her professionalism, respect and generosity during her time with Auckland Council and its predecessor, Rodney District Council, and wish her well in her future with Nelson City Council.
Yeah.
Lovely.
Is that the same?
And thank you, Councillor Sayers, as the second there. Would anybody like to say a few words, councillors or members?
Yep. She's always just lovely,
Deputy Chair.
aren't you?
Your patience must be outstanding.
Deputy Chair.
When I first arrived as a new, very green councillor, Elaine was assigned to me as what we now know as councillor support advisors. We didn't have that term back then. And she was just nothing short of incredible. I felt incredibly lucky to have someone shepherd me through the first few days who was so monumentally experienced and professional and all the things that you would attribute to Elaine in terms of someone stellar who fulfills her role, sometimes with a blindfold on. It's incredible.
Yes.
The way it just seems to emanate from you, your knowledge of everything local government. But there was also a personal side to it. She was just a great friend from the very get-go. And Elaine, you and I have had some fantastic chats together, as well as all the professional support. I can't say thank you enough. What a loss to us. And I, for the public record, I really hope Nelson knows what they're getting. I really do. And that comment is not just from their City Council perspective, the community of Nelson. I hope they know what they're about to inherit. So thank you, Elaine. You'll always hold a very special and dear place in my heart and in my memory. And I wouldn't mind a wee trip to Nelson at some point soon. So make sure you get the spare room ready. Thanks.
Nice.
Thank you, Deputy Chair. And Councillor Filipaina and Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, look, as one of the councillors that was here way from the beginning, I'm not going to repeat what Denise has said, but Elaine, the other connection we had was your husband used to be in the police. So, you know, that was actually quite good because for me, at least, I knew when I started talking, nobody else understood me, but you did. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you for all the work that you have done. And I mean, not only in Rodney, but like I said at the beginning of this, because the beginning of this amalgamation, that whole process was the pits, as you know. And so you, Sandra, Cecily, and all the rest were part of Warwick and the team that used to be at Grey Avenue. You know, the whole lot of you guys were sort of working together to ensure that the council laws and everybody else was looked after. So you did your job. And you did it well, and I say thank you and good luck on your next part of your journey, Elaine. Kia ora.
Deputy Mayor.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Elaine, always a smiley face, always good advice. You're going to a new stage in your life down there. You'll have an absolute blast down there. Nelson's a wonderful place, and that whole Tasman area is superb. So you and husband enjoy that immensely. I'm green with envy. Good on you, and thanks for your work with the Rural Advisory Panel, for listening to Bill's rant, and for the help and the work you did with those people who also expressed their best wishes for you in the future. Cheers, Elaine.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Councillor Walker.
Just want to acknowledge you, Sharon. Sharon, Elaine and I have got an understanding there.
Special name.
Tell us,
Bruce.
And essentially the understanding goes back to Elaine's history on the Rodney District Council. I think I'm probably the councillor here that's known you the longest around the table, and that was a considerable time. You were competent then, and you're equally competent now. And I'm hopeful that that there'll be an improvement in relations between the Auckland Council and Nelson.
as well.
Got that wrong. So go well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to say a few words? Think we're all done? We don't need to change Elaine to Sharon?
And Wayne to
Things
George.
up. How about before we put... Oh, look, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. And contrary note. Thank you, Elaine.
Do we need to
Right, back
put her
to
full
our
name in there for posterity?
agenda, and we'll go to item 11,
Biz, under
and that is the review and update on the Auckland Housing Accord. Welcome John Dunshay, Hayden Reid and Karen Foster. Members, we did discuss this on the 25th of July at a workshop for an hour. Unfortunately, those minutes of that workshop aren't up yet, but we will possibly go over that work right now. Oh yes, and thank you. I've received a declaration of interest from member Tawa Hanare, who is also a member of the Housing New Zealand board. So thank you, member Hanare. We'll record that. John, am I in your hands first?
Yes. Good afternoon, Chair. I'm joined by, again, as with the workshop, by Hayden Reid from the DPO and Karen Foster, who worked throughout the period of the Housing Project Office and therefore is very familiar with the HESHA legislation and the Housing Accord and its practice. I'm going to take it that the report is read,
Yes.
but I'd just like to go over a number of issues in the executive summary, just for emphasis in a way. And then I think there will be an opportunity for us to get in discussion about the housing data. So I think just to start, it is worth emphasising that the purpose of the Accord was to increase housing supply, which included increased availability of land as well as improved housing affordability. So right at the heart of this was increasing the supply of land available for development. And the way that that was done was by bringing forward land for development through the SHA process, which was able to be developed in accordance with the notified unitary plan and through the HESHA legislation by introducing new, more flexible consenting processes that enable consents to be granted more easily or more flexibly. So just to make that point, it was all about increased supply of land in particular to enable housing to be developed. The second point that there was a target, a 3-year target of 39,000 sites and dwellings to be consented, and it's worth emphasising that that was across Auckland, just not within the SHAs, and that consenting could have been undertaken either under the Resource Management Act or under the HESHA legislation. The other point I wanted to or just to re-emphasise that point is I don't think that it is clear to everybody, particularly when you hear some commentary, that even within the SHAs, that applicants could apply under either the HESHA legislation or under the Resource Management Act. So notwithstanding you were proposing a development within an SHA, you could choose to apply for consent through the normal resource management processes. You wouldn't have the benefits that went with the HESHA legislation or the Housing Accord, but for various reasons, they may have decided to do that. Then the other point I wanted to just be clear on was in terms of the disestablishment of the SHAs. So again, I think just taking a point from some of the commentary that's been circulating around the SHAs. The disestablishment process was a legislative process. It was provided in the legislation that they would come to an end after 3 years, and there was an extension, but all of the SHAs had expired by the 19th of May 2017. There was provision in certain circumstances for the Minister to disestablish an SHA, but that was never taken up. So those are the points I sort of really wanted to emphasise in terms of the process. In terms of the figures themselves, the target of 39,000, we've achieved 98% of that within the target. So we increased supply against that target by 37,716 dwellings, which is 98% of the 39,000. And in addition, it is worth emphasising that overall, if you took into account all of the sections as well as the dwellings that were consented, the potential supply that could be released over 20 to 25 years is as much as 66,000 dwellings. So there's two different things. We met the target, or almost met the target, but in addition there was the potential for 66,000 dwellings to be provided over a 20 to 25 year period because of the processes that were enabled through the Housing Accord and the HASHA legislation. And so I just want to leave it there and open it to questions.
Thank you, John. Members, are there questions on this report? Councillor Watson, then Councillor Casey.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. This may have been explained to us as earlier, but if it was, I haven't picked it up, and that's to do with the numbers of relative affordable homes that we know have been constructed, and I know you say here that we haven't ascertained that exactly yet, and this is part of bringing this paper.
Yep.
Am I right in saying though that the 49 declarations that we have received, that's the only number that we actually know for sure of affordable homes that have actually been built? Is that correct?
No, because there's for sure, yes, I suppose so. There's two parts to that. The first part of that is the fact that, yes, we are reviewing the statutory declarations and whether they've been provided, whether they're accurate. But there are other houses that we may have been built as retained affordable. So there were two classes of affordable, relative and retained. We only require the statutory declaration for the relative. But at the same time, the retained, which were provided by social housing providers, will have been constructing affordable houses as well. But again, because we didn't require stat decs for those, because they were being provided by social housing providers, we would have to check those in order to see how many of those houses have been built as well.
Okay, and just a follow-up question on the process here. This statutory declaration is then the means by which we keep account of how many are being provided, and also holding the developers, I guess, accountable to fulfilling. And
so,
but as far as reaching that number goes, and bearing the fact that some of these builds could be over 15 or 20 years.
Yep.
There's no ongoing requirement to perhaps reach a threshold by 25-50% of the development. It's just whatever may or may not come out of the tunnel at the end of the 20 or 25 years. Is that correct?
yes, so there's a statutory declaration which confirms that they have met the criteria set out in terms of relative affordability, and as they develop, they are required to provide those stat decs. There's no requirement on them to develop.
Thank you. Councillor Casey.
I've got 3 questions, John. My first is a paragraph in your report. It's paragraph 10. It reads, of the 154 SHAs, 25 did not have any consenting activity carried out before the SHAs were disestablished. Can you give us some explanation for that?
I'll ask Karen to do that, but we also, as part of our ongoing review, we will come back with a full report in October on the reasons why they weren't taken forward and the status of any of those potential developments. But I'll ask Karen to explain some of the reasons.
So through the chair, for some of the SHOs that we're aware of, and again we're going to have to go back just to confirm that this is the situation, some of them just didn't have the finances to develop. So there is one SHA that was applied for by a social housing provider, so they did not get the financing to essentially lodge their resource consents and to develop their property. And the same goes for some of the iwi providers that requested SHAs. Again, there was financing issues. But as John said, we'll need to go back and do further investigation as to why, which may require us to contact the developers and find out exactly why they haven't lodged their consents.
Okay. My second question relates to 2 specific sites, and thank you for providing this list. That's what I asked for, and I'm very delighted to see it. One of them is a development in Mount Albert. Both are dear to my heart. In Asquith Avenue, which was, we first looked at it on the 3rd of July 2014, and 3 years on, nothing has happened. That's a Housing New Zealand site. And the other one is Oruarangi Road in Mangere, which is destined to become home to 600, I think, 630 on 92 sites. Nothing has happened.
What's the question?
So it was a question.
The question is, who's monitoring the happening? It just says here QD, for Oruarangi it says QD lodged or approved. What's the next stage on that?
Do you want me to answer that? So through the chair, the Oruarangi SHA had to go through a plan variation to get their zoning on the site, so that has been achieved. And in order to get their plan variation, they had to lodge a qualifying development for a minimum of 50 dwellings, which I understand has been approved. So I'm not sure what the development situation is on the site, and again, that's one that we would need to go back and check to see what's happening.
I'd like an update then on those 2. Sure. Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, no, I've got another one. My last question, I said 3. My last question is really for the chair. Councillors may now be regretting their decision to remove the affordable housing provisions from the unitary plan. What would be the process through the chair for how would we go about making sure that we do that in some form? Is there a plan change that we could take through? What's the process for re-establishing an affordable housing provision for those councillors who may be regretting?
The short answer, it would require a council-led plan change, but I'll just go to the Director of Strategy.
Mr. Dougal is sitting at the back of the room, he'd be the man.
John, you'd be the man. John, what would be the course to go about possibly putting in place retained affordability or affordability criteria generally?
Well, you're correct, Mr. Chair. It will be a plan change.
Can hear.
Sorry. It will be a plan change to the unitary plan that will go through submissions and a hearing under the RMA.
Yeah, what's the process for starting that, John? Because I think that a lot of councillors who voted for that didn't realise what it actually meant and what it now means.
Through the Chair, last month's planning committee meeting, we put forward a work programme for changes to the unitary plan that was not on the list. So the current work programme doesn't include anything to do with retained affordable housing going back into the unitary plan.
So it needs to go on the work programme.
Process at this point in time.
So it is not in the work stream. No member has raised it with me or the Deputy Chair. And I hear you, and Councillor Philippina expressed concern about it to me as well a month ago, I believe, yeah. Councillor Philippina. I'm willing to have this discussion in a forum because I think not maybe this business meeting, because it's not on our agenda, but I'm very willing to discuss that further with you. Councillor Philippina is the other councillor that's raised it. Would that suffice, Councillor Casey?
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. We'll make a note. Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question to the officers: Section 4 of the Housing Accord Special Housing Areas Act sets out the purpose statement for the Act, including addressing issues for regions that have both supply and affordability issues. So I'm looking at the attachment B, the very helpful table here, and under the activity status, it refers to consents approved developer building homes. What I would like, in those places where that is occurring, what I would like to get, if that's possible, an extrapolation for where the developer is Housing New Zealand. In other words, where these developments are the state's developments, because the state is building homes and the state retains ownership of those homes. That it might address the issue of overcrowding and that people don't have access to a home, but I'm interested to know of the homes that are being developed, those homes that are being developed for the purpose of sale, in other words, so that Aucklanders can buy them. I'm wondering if, I know you can't do it now, but if that information could be provided, if you could extrapolate that out and circulate that.
So, I mean, there's two issues there. Firstly is, yes, we will be contacting Housing New Zealand as part of our review of the relative affordable housing.
Yep.
But there is some sensitivity within Housing New Zealand about some of the figures they release.
I'm not asking for the value of the properties, I'm asking for the quantum of the dwellings, because I'm assuming that you're talking about here, when you say developer building homes, I assume the developer, if it's Housing New Zealand, applied for the SHA status.
Yep.
So we could identify those properties and we could just take them out, and then the balance under the guise of consents developer building homes, yep. When we exclude Housing New Zealand, we will know, or we should have a much better idea as to the cohort of homes that are actually being built that may be purchased.
Yes, so we will be doing that as part of the review we do of the social housing providers. And we will pull those figures out and we'll provide them for you.
When do you think you'll be able to get that?
So we're coming back with that report in October.
Oh. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Simpson.
Oh, no, I don't need to talk. I'm happy to second this to you. I just
Put it on
think
the table then. I'll move
holding
the motions, but I'd like to come back to the C, because I think we need a bit more definition.
Well, I was just also wondering whether, if you, listening to Councillor Newman, if he's happy with B, bullet point 1, that the issue he's once reported on will be covered under that.
Okay, I'll let Councillor Newman consider that. You're seconding,
yeah.
Councillor Simpson, so it's moved and seconded. It's just on the table and we'll continue with our questions and discussion. So next I've got Councillor Watson.
I want to speak to the item, Mr. Chair.
Reserved for speaking. Councillor Walker, question?
Sure. I just have a question about the review going forward, and it also goes to the information that we've got around the housing accord. And the question particularly goes to affordability. And the background of the question goes to the observation that I've made, and I think a number of people may have made, that the special housing areas dramatically escalated the value of land in the areas affected, but also in the associated catchments, because there was an expectation that people could make more money at large. And the other issues that it would be useful to have some feedback on are around some of the problems in these areas, around infrastructure provision, instances because of the haste of the planning process and the lack of both public notification and even limited notification, that people in the associated community, neighbours and the like, have been adversely affected. So through you, Mr. Chairman, in summary, my question goes to a more expansive commentary on SHAs and the housing accord, in terms of whether they've delivered on particular things and maybe the things that they've actually made worse.
That's a very large question, Chair. If I was going to sort of start with what they've delivered. I think the bottom line really is that they've delivered supply. And if you want to look at the Accord, and the main area that they were looking at addressing affordability is through increased supply. So yes, we have met that target in terms of increasing supply of land available for development, and that land is available for development and was made available for development earlier under the unitary plan. So you could have had increased density. In terms of your question about infrastructure readiness, I think the task force put forward by the Mayor outlines quite well the issues that need to be addressed there, and I think a report was brought to the governing body last week about taking those steps forward in terms of addressing those issues, some of which relate to infrastructure, which will improve accessibility to those SHAs and enable them to be developed. And thirdly, in terms of increasing land value, yes, in the short term that may be the case, but then balanced by the increased supply. And then again, it comes back to the point that wherever you increase or improve zoning of land, you increase its value. So the unitary plan in certain areas will have increased the value of that land. And yes, in some areas where you've brought forward that zoning, you may have increased that land slightly earlier than others, but generally, if you had a lower density zoning and you got a higher density zoning under the unitary plan, the value of your land will have increased.
Satisfied?
No, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Member Nominee.
Just a question in terms of going forward. What useful data or information can be extrapolated in relation to the Māori space in this, looking back? I'm not necessarily asking you to answer it on the spot, but it's something that I'd be interested in as part of the next report back, is just... But I'm not clear exactly what might be available from the information you've got.
No, that's fine. So all I can do there is undertake to look at that and come back to you in October, either with some further information or some ideas on how we can look at that going forward.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Just questions of my own, John and Hayden and Karen, and I acknowledge the work you've put into this. This is complex. Not made any easier for you because of the absence of affordability targets within the Accord. And I think we'd probably all agree that looking back, that document could have been a bit tighter. But look, that's the document of late 2013, and here we are 3.5 years later. So look, I want to look forward now, but learn a lot out of this last 3.5 years, and I'm sure we all do. The future reporting is going to be important, and we're committing, if these motions go through, and I'm sure they will, quarterly reporting. The question is the content. So I've got a few questions. I'm hearing, and I've raised this prior, we need to get a better handle on affordability and measure that. So I'd like the team to come back to us maybe through a workshop and just look at how we can measure affordability, how we can trap the data. I'd also like to look at median house price growth and contraction, not just across the Auckland area from Tahana to the Bombays, but in maybe geographic catchments. There could be local board, but I think it needs to speak more to where people are living rather than the whole of Auckland. We only ever hear of the median house price right across the region. I think I would like to get some feedback on how we measure affordability, which is often measured with the median household income to median house price ratio. My own view on that is there are deficiencies in that as a measure. It fails to take into account a low inflationary environment where lending rates from banks are low, but other things like employment might be up or down, and we need a better handle on that, in my view. I'd also look at dwelling units completed, that is built and being lived in. Aucklanders don't live in consents, and I know our responsibility is consents. We don't build. We don't have that responsibility, but we have a responsibility to enable the building. So I would like to look at some real clear hard data, and possibly geographic again, on completions, that is builds with CCCs, people living in houses, and possibly also typology mix. Now, I know that might be asking a lot, but there is this huge growth in mixed housing, suburban and urban zones, and city centre zones. I'd like to look at, the apartments and townhouse mix. And then there's one category which I think we've overlooked entirely, and that is the rents on dwellings. I think we've got to understand that area a lot more, and more Aucklanders are renting, not owning. So I thought I'd just put those things forward to you. In some way they are a question for you to go away and explore, because at the moment the C is a little bit vague as to what might be reported back on. Members, I'm willing to just have the C sit as it is, and for all of us to contribute to what the future reports will contain. Is there a willingness to do it that way rather than list a whole lot of things here now?
Yep.
Member Hinare?
So will you circulate a starter for 10?
We will. We will definitely.
Yep. Happy to do that, Chair, and sounds like a good way forward.
So if there are any other items that members would like to have recorded in those quarterly reports, let me know, the Deputy Chair know, and we'll circulate a final recommendation.
So,
Councillor Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for clarity, maybe when you send it through, you should say when the response is due, so that it can be collated in a timely manner to meet the deadlines outlined in the resolution.
Thank you. We will. Yep. Going back to Councillor Casey's question, the inactivity at 25 applicant sites, it's about 16% of the number. I've counted that as 2,184 feasible units of the total 66,000. Do we have any information, sorry, Karen, I think you replied, we don't have detail on that inactivity at this stage, but we will be looking at that further.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I think, members, we do have to examine that.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I would also like to know if there's been value uplift and transfers on the back of just getting the SHA status. That might be difficult to track.
Yes.
And maybe of not a lot of value going forward. I also note the targets in the Accord were not about affordability, they were about supply, but the way the targets were written, new dwelling consents and new subdivision or site consents. Is there any risk that there was double counting?
There is a risk, but we spent a lot of time working through that to ensure there wasn't double counting.
Okay, thank you very much. Members, are there other questions on this matter?
Just a quick one.
Deputy Mayor.
Team, thank you for this, and thank you for the workshop last week, I believe it was. The work that this whole SHA, the Housing Accord, delivered, I understand, showed us some things that we could improve around as far as our work is concerned, as far as consenting. So you've got some examples of how those have been rolled out and to where?
Yes, I mean, consenting made easy is probably the answer to that. Yeah, I think that's in terms of the consenting and the approach that consenting made easy is taking in terms of the different kinds of consents they've got, online consenting, and in their Premier service, a more holistic approach to how they do consenting with a more across-the-board approach to working with other parts of council together to deliver a consent in a faster process.
So the live time consenting rather than elapsed time and that sort of thing,
Yep.
drive it through. Okay. I think it's a very important part that we need to actually, there have been some lessons learned here, Mr. Chair.
Yep. And the importance of pre-application work.
Yep.
Thank you. Other questions, members? Members, I'm just going to take a few moments to speak to this motion. As Planning Committee Chair, I take this area as work critical for this committee. I think, upon reflection, the Housing Accord has been an absolute positive for Auckland. And looking back, it's easy to criticise it in part, but overall, it has addressed the issue of supply. It has made a lot more dwelling units feasibly possible for delivery through building. This accord, in some ways, was the beginning of now a strong relationship between government in Wellington and local government here in Auckland to increase housing supply and address affordability. I've reflected on the lack of affordability targets, though at that time, in 2013, the Demography International Housing Survey identified Auckland as severely unaffordable. You go back to the prices being paid in 2013, they were well south of where they are now. So in terms of affordability, we are not abreast of that issue at all. We need to get abreast of that issue. We are well abreast of supply, in my view, but it is now our task to enable that feasible number of 66,000. So the HASHA legislation, as legislated, had some advantages, and then there were some oversights there. And I really do want to stress that people don't live in consents, though consents is our business. We've got to convert that now into actual buildings where people will live their lives right across Auckland. The relative and retained affordability criteria, it has proved extremely difficult to collect the data in that area. I acknowledge the team that have been desperately trying to track down that information and will continue to track down that information. I know it's not an easy task, John and Hayden, but I am confident that you have been doing your very best to uncover that work. I don't think many people were aware that the journey, like the pathway through RMA or HASHA could be taken. If you were an SHA applicant successful, you were one of the 154, it did not prescribe that SHA applicant to go down the HASHA pathway. You could take the RMA pathway, and in doing so, the retained and relative affordability criteria did not apply. Another lesson learned. We have met the supply target, just shy of it. 39,000 was the target, 37,700 was achieved in dwellings and sites. But going forward, I've mentioned the 25 SHAs that are showing no activity signs whatsoever. We'll follow up on those. Going forward, I think this is going to be progressed through our ongoing collaboration with government and our council, but adding also in the private sector. now's the time to actually join up with the private sector, as the Mayoral Housing Task Force report outlines. That is the difference in the Mayoral Housing Task Force report. I also note that there were quarterly reports to be delivered. The last quarterly report, for some strange reason, was September last year made publish. There are outstanding quarterly reports. I understand that our council and MB staff have done their job in collecting all the data. It's up to the Minister to release those 2 reports and the final report for the period to the end of May. Is it May?
Yep.
I also note from reading the HASHA legislation that there were other areas of joint action, and it wasn't limited to these areas. And I can't see, by reading the quarterly reports, any really substantial work in addressing the cost of building materials was one point, and addressing industry skills training. There are other points that were raised in the legislation, looking at compliance costs, and as the Deputy Mayor's just reminded us, we've done a lot in the Consenting Made Easy work, which was peer-reviewed and is now being implemented, and options for financing core infrastructure. As we well know, the HIF and the Housing Infrastructure Fund and the other body of work, SPVs, just confirmed. But there is no evidence, as I can see, that work has been undertaken, and it's really not the sole job of this council to address industry skills training and cost of building materials. And we know through all the work that's gone into the Mayoral Housing Task Force, all the inputs there are saying those 2 key issues are driving housing costs up in Auckland. So we've, in my view, through the unitary plan followed by the future urban land supply refresh, there is no question about there being a shortage of land being supplied in Auckland now. That job is done. The key job is to now convert that into real dwellings for people.
That's correct.
So let's build on the lessons of the SHA HASHA process and quickly move forward. And ongoing members, we will have to stay abreast of this on a quarterly basis, not just for a couple of years or even half a decade. This is going to be a relentless task for at least a decade, if not more, if we're going to get on top of the housing supply crisis and the housing affordability crisis here in Auckland. So thanks to the team, and thanks for your willingness to explore this a lot harder.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try and be succinct. This is actually an important item that's been brought before us today, focusing as it does on attempting to ascertain how many retained and relative affordable homes have actually been constructed. That's the purpose of the report. I fully acknowledge what John said in terms of the supply, and what the Chair has also said. That's been a success, and there's a huge amount of land that's now been opened up for potential development. But where I would disagree a little is in terms of the importance of the affordability in the whole process. Certainly as far as the public went, and also councillors, the affordability provisions were right at the heart of that whole process of actually stumping up with a 10% number of affordable homes in any given development, if we were going on the relative affordability index. And that was certainly the public expectation too, I would suggest, that the quid pro quo for all the advantages that were conferred on developers, and I remember Councillor Newman listing those, I think, at the workshop in terms of streamlined consenting, limited notification processes, limited appeal rights, unitary plan zonings being adopted before the unitary plan had actually passed, which I must admit was always one that I found rather difficult to explain to people who are asking questions about the process. So in light of all those very significant advantages, the expectation was that, that we would be getting a reasonable share of affordable housing for the less fortunate who can't enter the housing market. To date, we've received 49 of these statutory declarations, and there may be more. Conceivably, there may even be less. That is rather disturbing, Mr. Chair, from my perspective, and I think in light of the basic premise that supply would also result in affordability in the short to medium term, not just that kind of nirvana way out in the future. It's now mid-2017. The Housing Accord was established in 2013. I look around my ward, which is fairly representative, I would suggest, of middle-of-the-road type of developments. And I raise this in relation to the typology argument. So we were told essentially that the increased supply and the different typology of housing would result in essentially driving the prices down. That certainly hasn't happened thus far. Average house, 1.2 to 1.4 million. I'm talking about Millwater here, could just as easily be Hobsonville or East Coast Bays. Townhouses, terraced housing, around about the 800k mark. Apartments, I thought they were going to be the things that the poor young people started on the housing ladder. They're anywhere from about 600 to 700 to 800,000 for a 2-bedroom. The cheapest 1-bedroom apartment in the back streets of Albany I could find was for 500k. That was for a 1-bedroom apartment. So, I'm glad Councillor Casey brought up the reference to the vote in the unitary plan, because as other commentators have said, the notion of the supply resulting in more affordable houses is really premised on the basis that there is going to be sufficient production to produce that quantity. I saw those graphs during the workshop that showed that, that we are struggling, I think, to even be half the housing supply of the early 2000s or thereabouts in terms of dwellings actually being constructed. So if that productive capacity falls short or it just even maintains on its current level, then the whole premise of supply equaling affordability then tends to fall rather short, and that would make the suggestion of Councillor Casey's then all the more relevant, that unless there's some sort of intervention from the governing body in terms of revisiting the affordable provisions of the unitary plan through a plan change, then this really turns up to be a successful exercise in having a lot of land zoned for development without that development occurring, and certainly without a degree of the affordable homes that everyone seems to think is so necessary, and which is necessary. So I guess, Mr. Chair, by way of conclusion, I would just say that this is important for establishing the numbers. As it stands, I'm taking it that there's 49 affordable homes have been built. That's what I'm reading this to mean. And I would say, Mr. Chair, that 49 would tend to fall a little short of what the public would have expected when we embarked on this process. So I thank the staff for signalling that they are going to be robust in attempting to actually ascertain that number, because if it is as low as that, or if it's a little bit higher, then this process, in terms of delivering affordability, is going to be found to be wanting. And as I said, the fact that we've opened up land for supply, and I'm not blaming the council one bit for that, is going to be small comfort to the hundreds of thousands of people out there who would like to get into a house and who have absolutely no show of doing it at the mark signalled in my brief analysis of my own ward, and which would hold true for all the rest of your wards as well. Thanks.
Well done.
Thank you. Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, very briefly, Mr. Chair, and thank you very much, and thank you for the team. So this hash-up process was not going to provide a silver bullet, because there isn't one. There's many levers, historical and current, in the unaffordability of housing in this city, and indeed in other cities in this country. We have enabled the delivery of a thick end of 38,000 extra dwellings. That's good. We have increased the pace of it. Now, some councillors are arguing that there was public rights or individual rights were put to one side to increase the pace of delivery. Well, the alternative is we'd be in a worse situation now if we hadn't done that. The land volumes have been released by this council through the FULS process, the Future Urban Land Supply Strategy, and via the unitary plan is great. How many houses have been built? Well, they're being built by the day now. So a lot of the initial first tranches of SHAs were in greenfields. The infrastructure had to be provided after the structure planning done, and you don't do that in a click of the fingers. So as you've said, Mr Chairman, over the next 5 to 10 years, we will see these 37,000 houses or thereabouts delivered. And it's going to be more than what that would have been otherwise, and that's a good thing. And we are houses short, and the other side of that quandary is, of course, when we started this process, Auckland's population increase was around 16,000 a year, and now it's almost 3 times that. So no matter how fast we run, we've got the challenge of that immigration, which is also an opportunity. Some of the factors are beyond our control, the price of materials, the price of labour, and that's intergenerational issues from education through to building materials supply that we need to work with the government to try and render. So we've allowed more land, the unitary plan has allowed more intensification, we've worked with the Crown to help deliver the infrastructure quicker and better and more affordably, and now they're looking for the industry to ramp up and deliver more, and that will take time. It's not a 5-minute job. So all in all, I think this is a positive, and the urban myths that are floating around are exactly that, the urban myths. Don't forget the 16 potential extra houses. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor.
Councillor Newman.
Yeah, potential's a good word, Mr Chair, because potential's not a house, it's a potential house, and it will be coming in the future when someone decides that the investment proposition is good enough to deliver it.
Exactly.
But that's not right now.
That's right.
It's never been right now. The purpose of the SHAs is set down in the Section 4 of the Housing Accords and Special Housing Areas Act that addresses both supply and affordability, but this has not addressed the issue of affordability, and it probably never will, because that's not the intention of someone who's in the market when you have to turn a dollar. This is about a profit margin per square metre, and that is the imperative. You cannot expect someone who is risking a dollar, risking financial covenants with their banker, to go and deliver a product that is suboptimal when you have to capitalise the value of the land holdings, and the land, of course, is very expensive. Mr Chair, I think with respect to supply, and I don't want to take you to task, but I have looked at the unitary plan maps for the notified unitary plan. It's interesting. You know the single house zone in the urban coastal environment of Auckland, where does that apply? The single house zone? I'll tell you where it applies. It applies to places like East Coast Bays and Takapuna and Devonport and Chelsea. It doesn't apply to anywhere in the south, because in the south we build really high, we build really intense, right up to the edge, and we sweat our infrastructure in the south, because of course that's what we do. Whether we like it or not, planning tends to generate the most voice and the most opposition from those communities who are best placed to challenge planning frameworks that they don't like. And in wards like mine, well, we just have to suck it up. We have had to endure, in my view, a curtailing of important property rights through a democratic process that has been deliberately truncated. So it is, people have always had the right, until recently, to challenge the merits of development applications that had adverse effects on them, but no more. And that has resulted in a lot of these SHAs being agreed, but that actually hasn't delivered any more housing, and it probably won't. And when that housing is delivered, I would suspect a lot of it won't be affordable, or not by any relative measure for my community, unless, of course, we do what Councillor Casey is advocating, which is actually get back to the task of having an affordable housing policy. I can't believe I'm the one that's saying that, but it's actually necessary, because there has to be some upside for the community if it's to lose all of its rights. There has to be something that comes back. What is it, 49 affordable houses? What a pathetic joke that is. And there won't be many more coming, because, of course, there's no incentive to do it.
That's right.
Those 49 houses, I suspect, Mr Chair, and I don't know, we could almost go for a drive and look at them, but I bet you they're small, because the cost per square metre does not come down. It's just the size of the house, I suspect.
They are small.
We need to ensure...
Could be tiny houses.
Just,
Do I have the
the
call?
floor's yours.
Yeah, thank you. Mr Chair, we actually need to give some form and depth to the other side of the debate, which is not about some theoretical consented dwelling that's not going to be a house anytime soon. We actually need to address the substance of there aren't enough dwellings in the community that have been built which are even remotely affordable. And my final point, Mr Chair, is increasing the supply of housing owned by Housing New Zealand does not in itself address the housing affordability issue. It might increase the number of dwellings, but my community has more ambition than that. The people that I represent would like to own some of those houses out there, and they can't, as long as we run a very narrow view of what this supply issue is all about.
Very good
Thank you.
contribution.
Just to, points raised by Councillor Watson and Councillor Newman just then, on the 49 that is mentioned by both speakers, there's going to be further interest in the number of affordable units, dwelling units that have been built. Yep. I understand from your report that you will be doing further work for your quarterly report, because they are only the 49 for which you have received statutory declarations.
Correct. That's right.
And there was no requirement to file statutory declarations. You have to go hunting them. Is that correct?
No, so just to be clear, those statutory declarations are provided by purchasers of those affordable units, not the developers that are providing those affordable units. So it may look like only 49 affordable dwellings have been sold. It is a requirement in the consent. There's a condition that the developers must, or the purchasers must provide the developers with a statutory declaration that they meet the criteria as a first-time buyer, an affordable dwelling buyer. But we need to check that all of the houses that have been sold under that scheme have had statutory declarations provided, and that may require us to go and contact those developers to make sure that they have been submitted back to council.
So we are going to have to go through them all line by line. It also, as we've touched on, it ignores the retained affordable, and also it ignores the houses that are yet to be built.
So that feasible number, that so-called affordable, retained and relative affordability number could be as high as 2877, which is the last two columns in your dashboard.
I'm not sure what the figure could be, but it could be higher, yes. Yeah. Particularly if you take into account, well, it will be higher, particularly if you take into account the retained affordable.
Okay, we'll get closer to that at the quarterly report in October.
Yep.
Thank you.
It's going to be a big report.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I just want to provide a little bit of a counter to some of the disappointment, because I actually go around my area and some of Councillor Watson's area, and I'm seeing a lot of houses being built. And there's another one in particular, Moya Road, which is an iwi and Fletcher's development, which there's going to be 196 houses, which a considerable amount will be affordable. It'll be social, but there will be houses for sale. And looking at, they've already built 3 as the show homes within the last basically 6 months. They're ready. They're putting the trees in as we speak, the fences, and there's a really good mixture of types and sizes. And given that the most needed houses are 1 bedroom and 4 to 5 bedrooms, it's fine to have a tiny house. Hey, most of us around this table grew up in a house of 3 bedrooms, 1 toilet, 1 bathroom, no walk-in wardrobes, you know, none of that stuff. And we turned out pretty good, you know. I think my parents put the insulation in themselves. But the reality is we don't have to have big mansions. What we're really looking for is roofs over people's heads that are warm and dry. You know, if people need a 4-bedroom house and they need a lot of help, they will get that Housing New Zealand house. And the other thing I'm seeing, I'm really pleased to see huge amounts of redevelopment of SHAs, especially in the Bruce McLaren area in Henderson, which is quite a poor area. Housing New Zealand houses, every week I get a letter from Housing New Zealand to say, we're redeveloping that site, 1's coming down, 4's going in. So I just think that is fantastic. And if we'd waited for the unitary plan, and I know, I wasn't on the council at the time, but I listened to the commentary, there was huge angst about, oh my God, the government are going to make us do this, they're going to make us do that. But actually, you know, quick and dirty it was, you know, because people were worried about sites being, you know, not moving quick enough. And now we're pretty much 3 years ahead of where we would have been now. And everybody says, oh, there's no houses built. Hey, look, it takes a hell of a long time to get it done. And I think now we've got this lead lag time, and we're going to start to see more and more results. So we won't get an instant drop in prices. That's not reality. But we will start to over time when there's more and more houses in the market. So I think, look, for how quick it was done, it was the first time ever, you know, everything's, you know, we've got to develop on. But also, it's done now. This isn't going to happen again. We've got a unitary plan. So I say, yeah, keep monitoring it, look at it, but let's move on and get, you know, make sure that we do our consenting and our infrastructure well so people can build on the zoning that we've provided. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Cooper. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Just a suggestion going forward, Mr. Chair, and that is that it would be useful to actually have a little bit more information on this, on these 49 houses and the like going forward. So, you know, are they one bedrooms or the like? And if we could follow up on those 49 houses over time, because it may well be that the affordable house gets flicked on very quickly and very quickly becomes an unaffordable house. And that would be of interest, because I think it's really important for us to have some really good information about this particular project, really around its success or not, because I take a number of these comments with a grain of salt, and my own view, and I'd suggest that of a number, is that it was not a success. In fact, it had the opposite effect.
And final call, Councillor Clough.
I don't have a lot to say other than I think that's actually the SHA legislation's been a rort and hasn't particularly worked very well at all, and we clearly haven't seen a lot of buildings being built. The one thing that's just always missing in this question about housing is and the recent $600 million housing fund that's been provided, it's all about 1 or 2 level houses. We as this council do not say much about apartments whatsoever. The government doesn't say anything about apartments. It's like it's an area you don't go to. You don't talk about how we can get affordable housing by building up. It's like it's not the New Zealand way. Well, the New Zealand way is going to have to change, because I don't know, if you want your kids in a home, which is kind of not going to be a house, it'll be an apartment. It's still, house is a home and an apartment's a home as well, but that's the way to go. But even around this table, I don't know, we just don't seem to talk very much about intensification. We do not talk about high-rise buildings as though, don't want to go there, that's not the way to go. And I think that's a real failure in our own housing policy, that we just do not put enough emphasis or enough encouragement of people. And goodness gracious, if the government could just get the superannuation fund to start building some apartments like in Singapore or something like that, and getting people to live by choice, and people will move on. You can then move and buy a house later on, but apartments are often the way to start out in many cities in the world, and they're often the way to end up in your latter years when you downsize. So I don't know, I just think that's something we need to be really talking about much more. As I say, it's sort of anathema to all the main parties actually. No one's really talking about apartments because supposedly it's just not the Kiwi way, but I think the days of the quarter acre Pavlova paradise are well and truly gone. So I just want to comment on that.
Thank you, Councillor Clough. Oh, I will take Member Tauhana.
Yeah, just a comment, Mr. Chair. I just returned from the Australian Affordable Housing Conference, and I was actually absolutely blown away, not only by some of the housing projects around the world, but also about the problem in Sydney. If we think we've got problems, think again. Sydney has massive infrastructure problems and housing problems. And I do think that...
They don't have amalgamation. And they don't have amalgamation.
Oh, it really doesn't matter. I mean, Sydney can't go anywhere but up. What I was going to say is that I think that this council, this planning committee here, has an opportunity to actually think outside the circle, and like Councillor Clough says, gone are the days of our quarter acre Pavlova paradise. We really, honestly, have to start thinking about going up and in numbers. The unitary plan does that. I think it could do more, but I think that we have to start thinking about doing things now rather than in 10, 15 years, because by that time we'll be behind the 8 ball more than we are now. So now's the time to be bold and to be brave.
Thank you, Member Hanari. I will close the debate at that and put it to the vote. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Contrary, no. Declare that carried. Thank you, John.